CGTN headquarters in Beijing. This is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.
Recently, DeepSeek has been making headlines across the world. This AI model highlights China's growing competitiveness in the global AI race, as it is considered to outperform other popular models at much lower costs. Many see it as a potential new path towards achieving AGI, or artificial general intelligence. At the recent Paris AI Summit, DeepSeek also draws significant attention for its advancements in the large language models and its potential impact on global AI leadership. Some say it has accelerated US-China competition, and frontier AI took center stage. But is DeepSeek really as powerful as perceived? How does it shift the balance in the tech competition between China and the United States? And how can we ensure that AI technology benefits more people worldwide?
Today, we're very happy to be joined by a group of panelists. Now, joining us from London is Angela Lee, chair of the London School of Economics China Development Forum. From Berlin, Germany, we have Thorsten Jelinek, European Director and Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute. And from Tokyo, Japan, we have Andy Mok, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. And from Beijing, Professor Gai Keke at the School of Cyberspace Science and Technology at Beijing Institute of Technology. Andy Mok, let me turn to you. You have been following the development of Chinese tech sectors. In what ways do you think DeepSeek distinguishes itself from other models and other algorithms and apps in the market around the world?
Well, Wang Guan, I think that what DeepSeek has accomplished is a very important milestone from several perspectives. So as we just heard, from the perspective of the artificial intelligence industry, it was able to deliver comparable results at a fraction of the cost. So what this means is that this actually challenges the most fundamental understanding of how the AI industry works. So many around the world, especially the technology leaders in the United States, have long believed that the way you improve AI, and in particular, the way you achieve artificial general intelligence, is by spending more money on more and more advanced chips, largely from NVIDIA. And what DeepSeek has shown is not only can you do it with much less money, but you can focus on using software algorithms in a very clever way. So that's the first point. Second point, this challenges the American understanding of how generally economic and technological success works, in that it's long been an article of faith that breakthrough innovation only happens with quote-unquote free markets, quote-unquote democracies. And DeepSeek, of course, as a Chinese company, has really shattered these preconceptions. And finally, I think what DeepSeek has done is that it has challenged the prevailing economic model globally, in that it not only has achieved comparable performance to OpenAI's ChatGPT, but it has made it open source. And what this means is that anyone, anywhere around the world, can modify the code, improve it. So this has profound ramifications for the future speed of development. But it also is likely to empower those in the global south for whom cost is a very real barrier. And I think what this also shows is that DeepSeek is an example of China's vision to provide key global public goods.
Angela, let me turn to you in London. I heard that you're an avid user of generative AI apps. Tell us about your experience using DeepSeek. What is it like? How do you like it?
My peers and I have been testing DeepSeek extensively, and a very fascinating story. So one day I was in class, and a European friend of mine actually came up to me and said, you know, this whole thing about DeepSeek, I'm like, yes, I know that it made NVIDIA stocks drop by a bunch. What about it? they're like, well, I suggest you to use it. It's better than ChatGPT. And since then, I've been using it quite extensively. And, the real surprise is that it's known to be having a higher, more analytical power and to put it in simple terms, a higher IQ and EQ compared to ChatGPT. And we ask questions about, do you have consciousness and do you have, those to what extent, and feel very philosophical questions that requires a lot of rigorous analytical thought. The humility and the rigor that comes from DeepSeek, it's truly impressive. And I'm an avid user, of course, but then my peers who are from the Americas, from Europe, from the global South, and even my teachers, professors, I think have been loving it. So I think we really want to embrace DeepSeek, and the paralleled comparative advantage of DeepSeek compared to ChatGPT, I think it's pretty profound. I think for practical and everyday use, I think our first go-to tool would be DeepSeek from now on.
Thorsten, let me turn to you in Berlin, Germany, because people have been comparing Chat versus DeepSeek. How would you look at the comparative advantages of DeepSeek? I mean, apparently it is an indigenous Chinese application with different algorithms, open source features that Chat doesn't necessarily have. As a European scholar, how do you look at it?
I think it is a Sputnik moment, right? And of course, there are open source models. You have Llama from Meta or Facebook, and you have others, Mistral, the French source open source approach. But firstly, they don't reach the model capacity of OpenAI, which is a closed proprietary model. And with DeepSeek being open and reaching that performance makes it really a true remarkable moment, I think, in this AI history now, and I think it will be remembered for that. If you also compare on the open source approach, those open source approaches you will see, or you see with Meta, for example, they are not as open as the approach offered by DeepSeek for the R1 model and for the V3 model, these two different models. And so basically, any user can use it freely and also commercially. So there's basically no strings attached to that model. And, we are running a startup here. And the first thing we did, we downloaded the version and we linked it up with a agentic system where you can create agents and it works immediately. So it's fantastic experience. Of course, I think we will have more discussions. There are lots of shades of gray, nevertheless, in terms of performance, costs, etc.
Professor Guy, I really want to ask you about some technical specifics. For people watching this program, they have been talking about how different the algorithms are, of course, right? They've been talking about this distillation technology. Can you explain to our viewers in simple terms what exactly is distillation technology that is considered core, of the algorithms that DeepSeek boasts?
Well, I think one of the key features, the key difference between these two large models is that ChatGPT, as far as we know, it uses like transformer architecture, but this one, the DeepSeek, actually uses another architecture, which is called like a mixture of experts. That means we use like a more attention-based methods. In this case, actually, DeepSeek has a better performance in reasoning because of this new architecture. I think the key thing is that the DeepSeek actually tried a brand new method, which is totally different from what OpenAI actually explored in the past. Definitely, I think there are a lot of discussion on the website, but obviously, DeepSeek has provide us with a new idea for the development of AI.
Andy, how do you look at all these, talk about the algorithm being different and exciting, distillation technology, and potentially achieving, reaching the scaling law, meaning more data, high quality data being observed and obtained, driving us even closer to an artificial general intelligence, Andy?
Sure. Well, Guan, so my understanding is one of the biggest costs of training a large language model is the processing time that you have to run on these, again, very expensive GPUs, typically made by NVIDIA. So what DeepSeek has done is very clever engineering is probably the best way to describe it. So I'll use just a very quick example. So the standard for training a large language model is to use 32 bits, or you can think of it as 32 numbers, which takes up a reasonable amount of space. And when you multiply this by millions, billions, maybe trillions of calculations, this takes quite a lot of computing power and computing time. So one of the things DeepSeek did was they said, look, what if we could achieve roughly the same results only using 8 bits? And that's one of the things they did that sort of amazed the technical world. The other point I think it's important to mention too, Guan, is the team that built DeepSeek is entirely educated in China. So again, this challenges, I think, another article of faith, right? That you need to have Western educated technical people to make big breakthroughs. And this shows that this is not the case. So what this means then is that, we can do much more with existing hardware and maybe lower capacity chips, reaching artificial general intelligence, meaning machines that are as smart, if not much smarter than humans, maybe much more within reach, and maybe that the first AGI will be a native Chinese speaker.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope. That would be beautiful. The sound of Chinese being heard on that very platform. Thanks for that. Angela, let me turn to you. China did all this against the odds, obviously. There has been this U.S. tech restrictions, sanctions against Chinese technologies, the ban of exporting chips to China. How do you feel about that? China achieving all this against the, under the sanctions and the restrictions of the United States, Angela?
Well, thank you, Guan. And I actually want to build on a point that Andy mentioned earlier, which is, a lot of these discoveries are making the West, especially mainstream media in the West, a big surprise in terms of, how can we overcome these mainstream perceptions that a non-Western educated team could do something like this. And actually, to add on to this, I think it reveals about the great potential of Chinese private entrepreneurs, which challenges, the Eurocentric perception of the monolithic state, that in a country, like China, there's a lot of state intervention, etc., that we can't achieve something as great as ChatGPT. And now DeepSeek is here. One, it reveals that Chinese educated, mainland grown, a team of millennials can do something as great as this, but also the power and the capacity of the Chinese private entrepreneurial sector. So that's one thing I felt about it. And second of all, I think across Europe, especially in the UK, people are having a more pragmatic stance towards it. It's less polarized, less hawkish, and less zero-sum mentality. For example, Keir Starmer, he recently unveiled a plan to use AI to boost productivity. And there's all this talks about, the centuries-old Jevons paradox of, how we can achieve or use AI to boost consumption. I think all these very pragmatic talks are definitely helping the narrative. And I think it's very imperative that we kind of ditch that monopoly of innovation, hegemonic narrative that the U.S. is trying to prevail. But then also another observation is that people have been talking about, ChatGPT is blaming that DeepSeek, you're stealing American technology and using it as a lever. But then in science, we say this as standing on the shoulders of the giants. So I think it's a very naturalized process. And I think people across many sectors who are pragmatists and who are actually viewing this from a relatively objective lens are seeing this as, just a very naturalized process of a technological leadership shift. So yeah.
Thurston, let me turn to you. How about the European scholars and also the policy circles? How are they looking at DeepSeek? Apparently they're looking at DeepSeek with much less suspicion than the US Congress, the the Beltway policymakers surrounding the Trump administration. But give us a sense of the European policy circles. What are they going to do vis-a-vis DeepSeek going forward?
I mean, cynically put, we look with less, or the Europe looks less suspicion because we don't have any open AI here, right? So that's not a competition, and on the contrary, when you look first at the business, the CEO of SAP, the big software company from Germany, he saw it, Klein, his name, he saw it actually as an opportunity. On the one hand, I think it's legitimate. I think there are concerns, safety and security concerns about this strong digitalization and AI advancement. And I think you also have regulations in China and the United States. But you can see that EU has a particular regulatory focus on that, right? And I think the industry is not really fond of it. I think some argue that some regulation even elicit some innovation, which might be true because you need to live with this regulation. So we become also very innovative. But obviously, we don't have a DeepSeek now, which emerged in Europe. So, and then instead you have Italy, Ireland, Belgium, France, were the first countries which were immediately suspicious and investigating. They are legitimate concern, but I think this kind of risk-based approach or regulatory approach is less one of having just these concerns and having a fair competition, but more of protectionism, what we see.
Yeah.
And I think that's the unfortunate case here in the EU.
Thorsten, you brought up the concept of the Sputnik moment. That is, of course, well studied. That was a moment in 1957, if I remember correctly, when Dwight Eisenhower, then President of the United States, was sufficiently alarmed by the Soviet Union, who put a manned spacecraft into the orbit. And then we know what followed. There was this intense arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States. A lot of resources were spent in that regard. So let me turn to you, Andy. Do you foresee another Sputnik moment, given the fact that Trump has been talking about containing DeepSeek? The US Congress has been talking about getting alarmed by the DeepSeek. What's going to happen next?
Well, I think we certainly are witnessing a Sputnik-like moment here at Wangguan. And the optimistic view of this is something that the founders of Hewlett-Packard, which was once one of the technology leaders in Silicon Valley, said that competition brings out the best in products. So, and I think we already are seeing this in that since DeepSeek dropped or made its announcement, that OpenAI has accelerated the pace of its release of models. I think this is causing a rethink about what every serious player in the space has to do to be competitive. So here it's important to point out, it's not just DeepSeek with its extremely low cost of training its model, but the other big cost is the operating of the model, which customers pay. And this is usually measured in how much dollars per million tokens. And we can think of a token as a word. And a number of Chinese companies, not just DeepSeek, offer their models at a fraction of the cost. I think for OpenAI, it's like $60 per million tokens. And what this means is that it's making everybody more innovative and more competitive. So this is the positive view of this Sputnik-like moment. Now, of course, the downside and the danger is we're already seeing the U.S. resorting to its familiar, if somewhat ineffective, playbook of saying this is a national security risk. So they've labeled Huawei a national security risk, other Chinese companies. And the track record has shown that this is all largely backfired in that Huawei has thrived despite the attacks by the U.S. China's EV industry has achieved global leadership technologically, cost-wise, even design-wise. So I think this is a Sputnik-like moment. My hope, though, is that this will accelerate innovation and competition around the world.
Let me jump in real quick. Given what happened to TikTok, given what happened to ZTE and Huawei back in the day, aka US sanctions against them, what is the most likely fate of DeepSeek?
Yeah, I think we have to see one. So let's look at TikTok, for example. So President Trump was a vehement critic of TikTok, calling it a grave national security threat 2 or 3 years ago. Fast forward to today, where he says he has a warm spot in his heart for TikTok. And I think the key here is, can companies like ByteDance, like High Flyer, which is the company that launched the DeepSeek model, can they find a way to deliver decisive political value to powerful leaders in the US like Trump? And I want to point out, too, even someone like Chuck Schumer, a Democrat in the Senate, has also largely pivoted in his negative views towards TikTok. So again, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I do hold out hope that a way can be found where these companies can still thrive all around the world, but especially in the United States.
Let me turn to you, Thorsten. Should China be worried and alarmed by American rhetoric, potentially banning DeepSeek the way they banned TikTok and Huawei?
We know that President Trump is neither transactional, nor just peaceful. I think he's pretty realist. He has a very advanced team, is much more prepared, etc., etc. But I think one of the first statements, which makes him also a businessman, was saying, maybe not that bad. It reduces our costs, right? Because they need to spend a lot of money, right? They say maybe it goes cheaper. And let me quickly challenge a little bit. There are already a few DeepSeek service providers which offer the DeepSeek model, right, in the United States. And actually the costs are quite higher than what DeepSeek is offering. That means if you want to offer the model accessible as an app at scale, it is not that cheap what we think. So it's quite actually to scale it, to have the inference, to use it, it's not cheap. You need still a lot of GPU to run it, right, at scale. From this perspective, I think the United States is not too concerned, and I think this is a competitive moment as well. So you see already that some of these reasoning tools, this O1, right, from OpenAI, when you ask it, suddenly some Chinese comes up even from the reasoning, right? So they say, oh, they're using already DeepSeek to train their model. So what we have seen is a few Sputnik events, right? If I come back to that, the first one, of course, was DeepMind, right? Where China said, oh, what's happening? And then China really started investing. It was in 2016 when DeepMind was beating Go. And then we had 2022 when ChatGPT 3.5 came. That was also a moment. And now we have the reverse Sputnik moment in China. The fact that this is open source means the genie is out of the bottle, right? So you can run it locally, you can play with it, and not just in the United States, elsewhere. So
on that open source point, should people be worried about potential privacy concerns or leak of data concerns and potentially jeopardizing, security?
So I think, of course, this technology brings a lot of new contradictions, right? And we should not take it lightly. And Andy said it. There are some risks, of course, and I think that would be another show to talk about that. But some of the risks are still in the future. So many companies still struggling how to make use of it, right? The only company which really earns a lot of money is still NVIDIA on that. And that's not at the customer end, at the real economy, if you wish. So it's not, so no one really makes money with that, if you think of that. The DeepSeek, because of this rapid, great invention, I think they wanted to get it out, right? They wanted to get it out and let the community, work with that and explore it, etc. We will see what is happening, and I think it's good to have it out, so we will see the security issues, we will see the safety issues, and not pre-regulate them. So in Europe, we have pre-regulated them, which actually stifles the innovation, and also on the regulation, we have a lot of vertical regulations in the banking sector, in the health sector. So when you use those models in that sectors, you already have to comply to those regulations, right? So they're not always perfect, but they are there. It's not that we are on a complete free, unregulatory territory. Nevertheless, what we see a little bit of a gambling now. You see the executive order on AI was actually was scrapped, right, by the Trump administration. It came up from the Biden-Harris administration. And if I remember correctly, Eric Schmidt just said that the United States now wants to do it actually like China. You want to regulate it post fact. when something happens, which is often actually the Chinese approach, just let it go. And then when we see how it works and when we see the issues, we can regulate it more tightly. And I think the United States is moving ahead in the same direction. And of course, the risk is that we will see some misuse of that technology, etc., which we cannot just attribute to DeepSeek, which maybe we attribute to some who have bad intentions with that model.
Professor Guy, given the current success of DeepSeek being incorporated into big corporations such as Microsoft, 360, Tencent, you name it, what do you think will be its future?
Well, first of all, I want to respond to the prior question. Because like personally, I don't think the security and privacy issues will be a key problem for restricting the implementation of DeepSeek. First of all, I think all technologies will have like vulnerabilities considering the security and privacy concerns. So it's all large AI large models. I think DeepSeek is only one of the technologies that we are trying to use in this field. The key thing is that's how we use the applications that is constructed on the infrastructure of this large model. I think other applications will have very similar situations. So the thing is that we need to pay attention to security and privacy issues from the perspective of technology to try to have more solutions to protecting data security and privacy. So this is my observation on the security and privacy issues.
A final question goes to Angela. I mean, how do you see the tech race, the tech rivalry between China and the United States heading?
Since we're talking about the Sputnik moment, last week at the White House press briefing, Caroline Leavitt responded to Axios' question about DeepSeek, of course, and she said, well, President Trump said it's a wake-up call, and America will fight to restore American dominance. So from that standpoint, you can say that there's some parallels with the Sputnik moment. But then, taking it back from a more poli-sci perspective, I think no matter how much executive power I think President Donald Trump has, he got to consider domestic political pressures and the amount of geopolitical slack that he enjoys, right? So if he prioritizes economic nationalism, he's weaponizing AI as a rhetoric for China-U.S. competition. But then, he might get some backlash from U.S. tech firms who's reliant on the global supply chain and tacit global cooperation. So we got to keep in mind of that. During the pre-industrial age, before the Great Divergence, I think the lesson learned from there is that technological leadership shift, and there's no dominant center for tech hegemony. I think the rise of China's tech competition amid U.S. tech dominance, I think, is something that is natural in historical progress because of various contingencies and context-specific realities. So I think if we're focusing too much on the U.S., we overlook China's agency in this story. So I think, China's focus on self-reliance also contribute to the global economic AI ecosystem. But then I guess from that, the global economic history standpoint, we just have to accept that the shifting technological center is something as a part of human history. And I think the United States, in order to benefit humanity, needs to abandon that zero-sum mentality of always securing its hegemonic status in every sector.
Yeah, hopefully people can learn from history. Thanks for that. And I want to thank everyone for their insights. Thank you very much for joining us at this hour. And that will do it for this edition of The Hub on CGTN. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our news coverage continues. Bye.